Today we have Darren, who's a lawyer by training, right? So he looks at this stuff that we have just gone through, the legal verbal diarrhea for the last like 90 minutes, but he does it every day. I don't know how he does it, but he's a lawyer by training, done a lot of term sheets from a VC point of view, as well as from an entrepreneur point of view. I think the most recent thing that he did, I don't know, like each time I talk to him, he's doing something different, but the most recent thing he did, he just launched this hotel in Bali, so we can quiz him on that as well. And I don't know, we go quite some way back to school, right? Yeah. So it's a privilege, even JC actually. It's a privilege to have you here. Maybe if you spend 10-15 minutes sharing about, like the motivations for you doing what you do, and the most recent adventures you have, then we just kind of like open it to you guys. And girls and ladies and gentlemen to quiz him on the stuff. All right, Darren, please.
All right. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Darren. Thanks to YKIT for inviting me here today. Myself, just some brief history. I was originally from NUS Business School. I did the double degree with NUS Law School, so I graduated in 2011. I did my pupillage in Raja and Tan, where I practiced corporate law, doing mergers and acquisitions for 3 years. I then moved on to Shuklin and Bock for another 3 more years, doing corporate finance. So there we did mostly IPOs as well as cross-border M&As. After that, I left practice at the end of 2016, launched my own property development firm that had been in incubation for a few years. Headquartered in Jakarta, and we have 200 houses in development there. And in January 2017, we launched a hotel development in Canggu, Bali, where I spent about 1 week every month building a hotel. So that hotel has been announced on the SGX. We are signed with Ascott, who will be our hotel operator under the Citadines brand. So that's a 226-room hotel that I'll be selling as a condotel across first-tier cities in China, Hong Kong, Macau, Singapore, Australia, etc. On the side, I also dabble in a bit of other stuff. I had a mealworm farm with YKIT a couple of years back. You told them about that, right?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, the nonsense we do. Mealworm farm, yes, I do oil trading. So we trade about 2 million liters of oil every month in Jakarta. We buy from bunkers, we sell to petrol stations. It's an arbitrage. We also do cryptocurrencies. So as of now, I have mining rigs in Singapore and Jakarta, a total of about 90 rigs. We are trying to scale it up to 300. And we also do trading of cryptocurrencies. So we've been playing the arbitrage game between Singapore, Korea, Japan, as well as Indonesia. So that's been pretty fun so far. Not so fun today because there was quite a big drop in the prices, but as miners, we don't mine, we just mine. So that's the main thing of what we have been doing all along. So YKIT has probably gone through with you guys verbal diarrhea on the term sheet. I have sadly had the pain of going through over 100 of this in my short career as a lawyer, where I did not really have a life until I quit private practice. So the main thing about term sheets, I'm just going to go on all over the place. So if you have any questions, just feel free to stop me and ask me anything. The main thing about a term sheet that we always find problematic is the pricing. You could have a term sheet that's 6 pages long. You could have a term sheet that's 30 pages long. It all depends on the mechanics of the deal, the principal parties. If you have 2 guys, most of you here are Singaporean, so I'm just going to Singlish size this. You have 2 very simple taukees who have $10 million each. They're entering into a deal. Most of the time, they just want 6 pages, 5 pages, 3 pages. If you have Bain and McKinsey, a consultant like YKIT, they're going to ask me for a 35-page term sheet.
Yeah. That's where we add value.
Yeah, but we don't get paid in terms of how long we write our contracts or how much time we spend. We are paid based on the value that we create. But what we find very useful about term sheets is that it starts the ball rolling. You have people who will want to dive into every single nitty-gritty detail. My employee stock options, how much is that? My representations and warranties, what do I give, what do I not give? Due diligence, what do I cover, what do I not cover? You would see for most large deals the definitive agreements. That means the contractually binding ones that you enter into. These are things like shareholders agreements, joint venture agreements, investment agreements. These probably go up to about 100 pages quite easily. Your term sheet, it's basically a roadmap that allows you to start the ball rolling, to look at the big picture items, and then delve down into the nitty-gritties when you move on to the definitive agreements. The main part about the term sheet that I find very useful is it lets the main parties, so the CEOs, the founders, as well as the investment committee chairman for a VC, talk about the big picture items. And then once they link up and realize that, yes, most of the deals, 80%, 90% of the terms are there, then they'll leave it to their grants or subordinates to hammer out the rest of it. So when we were much younger, we were the grants doing all this. Now we at least have the privilege of at least working with most of them on the big picture items. Pricing is one issue that we always face because we can have a large mismatch in terms of what a founder or the entrepreneur has in mind and what a VC, the investor, has in mind. One of the most interesting ones that I had, a couple of months back, I did an advisory on a fintech trade finance insurance deal. So that one, the founder was a Filipino lady. She was from NUS Business School as well. And she was she was asking for an investment of 10% of a company, valuing it at $2.5 million. We looked at the P&Ls, we looked at the projections of profit, projections of revenue, the assumptions that she had. I could not see a reason why it was 2.5 million. Based on my aggregation, it was about 1 million. So we asked during a con call, for which she wasn't very well prepared, why it is 2.5 million. The reason she gave was that she went to angellist.co, took a look at comparable startups, comparable fintech companies, how much it's worth, how much sweat the founders have put in, and pegged it at the 25th percentile, which was honestly of totally no value to us because we look at the licenses that they have, the IP that they have, the distribution channels that they have, of which there was none because it is still a concept. So it was a bit terrible because she was very flustered. You could hear her about to cry on the other end of the phone call. She was crunching the numbers, but the numbers don't lie. Because what she did was she gave us her projections, she gave us her assumptions and her numbers. You crunch that using any matrix that you have, whether it's discounted cash flow, whether it is net asset value, nothing would be exceeding $1 million. So in about 15 minutes, we cut the valuation from 2.5 to 1 million. So it wasn't so good for her, but it was all right for us. Happily, now it's already turned a corner. The company has doubled in value, so we're quite happy with this investment. And although we slashed down the valuation by quite a lot, there was no love loss. No, not love loss. We can't be in love with the founders. There was no hard feelings between all of us because what we added in terms of value was that we gave her access to financial technology. The consultants, people who had the distribution channels. Most of the time, you'll find that investors have a much wider network, a lot more exposure to various aspects of a business that may not be what you have in mind as a founder, but in terms of context, in terms of linking you up with, say, a government official, linking you up with, say, an advisor who can make the right calls, the right connections, that would be very, very valuable for an entrepreneur. The next thing about term sheets.
Or maybe we take a pause here and I just kind of recap some of the things that Darren had talked, right? Like one was about the preparation that was needed, right? If you think about what we discussed in a couple of classes ago, like going into the conversation, it's a coffee chat, but it's actually a negotiation, right? And what you do is not like you put in, this is my term, and then you walk away, and then they come back a few days later, this is my term, and then you walk away. It's real time and it's really fast. You need to be very in tune with the assumptions that you have and be prepared for a very real-time negotiation. Also linked to the point is that whole financial model that we talked about, right? The only thing that you are sure about your financial model is that it's going to be raw, right? But what's critical is the assumptions behind those financial models. And I think, and Darren's sharing here is that they tell a lot about the founder to the VC, right? Like what are the assumptions you use the comparables, right? It tells a bit about the entrepreneur. Like if there's something out of whack in there, like it just tells the story about the founder itself. So I think that's one of the important pieces in the financial model itself, right? And there was this last bit around the spirit of collaboration, right? While it's a transactional negotiation, a lot of it is the mentorship that the VC can provide, right? So don't look to your VC as just a form of financing. Look to them as a door opener and as mentors, as partners in crime, right, along the whole journey of the growth, right? So we take a pause here and maybe have any questions that you have for Darren at this stage.
Maybe just out of curiosity, has anyone negotiated, worked on a deal, M&A deal, venture capitalist deal?
So I have a question. Consider our better ones when it comes to developing the financials. Can you share any example of a situation where
Normally for assumptions, we have to show, that's me speaking from an entrepreneur's point of view, the assumptions you have to show to the investor is number one, that you're prepared for most contingencies. In terms of financial projections, in terms of sales revenue figures, you would be looking at three main, or for myself personally, I like three main scenarios. A conservative scenario, an aggressive scenario, as well as what I feel is a realistic scenario. Case in point, for my Bali hotel, sadly I do not have the cash to build a hotel all by myself, so I pitched it to a Chinese private equity fund. What they had requested for was a projection of how I think we'll make money from this. What I do is I build 226 rooms, I sell 70% of the rooms, I recoup most of the money, I try to double my money, I keep the other 30 for myself. I could spin it off as a REIT or something like a tokenization, that's possible. So they're gonna ask, number one, when you sell your rooms, what price would you be selling it at? I could sell it at $100,000, I could sell it at 150, I could sell it at 200. So what's conservative, what's aggressive, what I feel is realistic. And then all of this would be based on what you've seen in the market, comparable condotels, hotels, you know, what are other people charging, what have other people achieved that's realistic. Because you could go online and find a lot of nonsense. There are people who are selling it, you know, you can make 25% per year. That's indefensible, because once you crunch the numbers, you know there's no way you can get that done. And how do you work around with that? You have to work around with assumptions that parlay into your final assumptions. So one of the factors that would play into revenue would be your occupancy rate. So, for example, we would be guessing how many rooms a night, room nights a year would the hotel be able to achieve in Bali. So you will be surprised that in Kuta, in Seminyak, the tourism center in Bali, they can reach as high as 95% in a year. That to most people would be far-fetched, because most industry operators will say, you know, 75% is awesome. But how does that work? So we actually get industry insiders, people who are in the Bali Hotel Association, to give us these confidential numbers. How you can get that done, it's up to you. Just get it done, and you can get the numbers. And these numbers are based on a particular source. So for example, like for us, because what I did was I signed my hotel contract with Ascott. Ascott has an existing hotel in Kuta. They had previous performance records. I took that, I gave it a 10% discount, and showed my investors probably we could hit about 78%, 80%. That's what I feel is realistic. And that was what allowed me to get a funding quantum that I was looking for. So I think that's the main thing if you're looking at how you want to play your assumptions around. It boils down to a lot on common sense. You just have to think about it as if you're sitting on the other side, how would you tear apart your own business plan? And this, it may or may not be inside your term sheet. So that's something you have to be very aware of. And I think just one point to add out, random thought, is that a term sheet may or may not be legally binding. So if it's legally binding, and let's say I say we lock it at $10 million, a legally binding term sheet means I cannot escape from a $10 million valuation. Whereas if it's not legally binding, I do have some leeway to adjust the valuation when I move down to the definitive agreements, whether it's the sale and purchase or the investment agreement. That it's another consideration that most, whether you're on the entrepreneur side or the investor side, most people would be playing that. Because at the end of the day, you're playing a poker game. How much you have in terms of bargaining chips, whether you play with red herrings, those are things that we all have to take into consideration. So sometimes you can even slide things that are of no matter to you, but they look preposterous. And the other side's going to say, you know, I don't like this clause. For example, they send a junior lawyer, a junior tax advisor to come to negotiate on the table, you can give in 3 points that don't matter to you, no skin off your nose, and then you take 3 points that you like. So that boils down to post-term sheet negotiations, which I find quite intriguing. But I think that's probably another class in itself.
Yeah, there will be a negotiations class as it comes to that. But recapping this point, I think there are two important points here. One is, and it's related to Oscar's earlier point, which is at the highest level, those comparables and benchmarks may not make sense, but it's important to break them down to logical drivers of the assumption. And the drivers themselves, it's important to get them validated. And one good way to validate them could be benchmarks. So where I earlier made perhaps a sweeping statement to say that benchmarks may not be as relevant in the VC or term sheet context, they are not relevant in the valuation point of view, the overarching number, but in the drivers that get to your valuation, it's important to validate them. And how you validate them, you could take in different shapes and forms. And that's important, especially for your assignment context, which we'll get to it in the course outline, right? Because the assignment will ask for some form of valuation, which you need to find drivers for it. Okay. The second point is actually an interesting one, where the authenticity and candidness is actually quite an important factor in the trust building, right? Because if you're open to the risks and how you mitigate them through your different scenarios, I think it gives a good flavor to your VC that one, you're prepared for those risks and you recognize what those risks are, but two, that you are candid and authentic with him or her about what those risks are and flagging them out, in spite of the fact where it could affect your valuation, right? But just being candid with them helps build that trust, and I mean that trust and collaboration is more important than a slight edge in terms of valuation. Right?
So one of the things that I had in the assumptions that I gave was I gave an assumption of what happens if I can't sell a single room in the hotel to the investor. I was saying that I'm selling my rooms to other people, but my investor who gave me the money to build the hotel in Bali, I gave them an assumption to say, in the worst case scenario, I can build the hotel, but I'm not able to sell a single room to any secondary investor. So what's going to happen? My investor, the guy who has flushed me with cash, is going to be stuck with a hotel. That's the baseline. He has enough money to build a hotel by himself. By selling the rooms, we essentially de-risk the entire project. We double our money within 3 years. So that's the ideal situation. The worst case scenario is we built the hotel. I maybe hit 60% occupancy. I couldn't sell a single room, but his ROI is still pretty decent. He has a break even of still about 9 years, 10 years. So that to him is still all right. Most investors will have IRR thresholds. As long as you can meet those, most investment committees will be happy to go ahead with the investment. Yeah. So Oscar, you had a question?
Yeah, what are the more popular deal breakers in the negotiation of term sheets? Because in my case, coming from banking, collaterals are some of the popular deal breakers.
Yeah.
For VC,
For VC, the biggest deal breaker, which parlays into the biggest success factor, is actually the capability of your management team, your founders, how strong they are. Do you have the confidence? Because at the end of the day, if you're looking at people giving you valuation, anyone can crunch a number. You can find a very good analyst in almost any bank. Just go there, throw a stone, you should be able to hit a good analyst. Same thing, good lawyers, good accountants, good tax advisors, etc. But to find an awesome founder is an extremely, extremely difficult thing to do. It is something that you cannot quantify. The guy could have a first-class degree, it could be from Stanford, it could be from Harvard, but it counts for nothing if the guy cracks under pressure, if he has no idea what he's doing, if he's just not a personable guy. You have a guy who's brilliant, but cheeses off everyone he talks to. How is this guy going to go around making business contacts to make the business work? Sooner or later, he could end up like Travis from Uber. You never know. So it's which point in time the startup may crash and burn. So Uber did it after they achieved unicorn, possible. More often than not, we see people who can't even get it off the ground. Everything looks fantastic. You can come up with an awesome business plan. But to execute that, you need a very safe pair of hands. You need someone with the guts, and of course, someone with what we call the Midas touch. It's something you just can't find. But how do you find that? You have to talk to them. You have to negotiate with them. After all, you know that that's pretty all right. There is a fine line between inexperience and a lack of ability. An inexperienced person would be able to learn. So that's something that you can find out after a few months. You can coach that person. A person who's just inept in business should stick to being an employee. We don't know, possibly. About half of our deals possibly will burst. So we've been lucky so far. So that's one deal breaker. The second deal breaker that we always find is also linked to the startup. It's a lack of candidness, because you as an investor would be talking to your entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is not ready to disclose most of the stuff that they have. Most of the time as an investor, my frustration is with due diligence. Whether I'm doing due diligence from a legal or in financial or commercial perspective, if they're not willing to give up most of the information, they're holding everything close to their chest, we're going to have a lot of problems because we do not know what capabilities they actually have. Where they are standing in terms of, for example, intellectual property, in terms of service agreements with key consultants, or even, for example, off-take agreements. You could have a guy who says he wants to build a power plant in Jakarta. He comes to you with fantastic numbers. He says people are all going to buy off him electricity that he generates, but he doesn't have a single off-take agreement to show you. An off-take agreement, for those who don't know, is a commitment by a buyer to say that when your power plant is up, I'm going to buy how many megawatts from you at a certain price. So that means you've locked in the buyer. If the guy can't give you that and he's being coy about that, then that's going to be something that you have to be very worried about. Those are the red flags that will pop up. Any other questions? If not, I'm just going to ramble. Okay.
Sorry, to validate or rather, how do you prove to the investor, to the VC, that the insider info that you have is actually legit? Because there's a certain form of I guess secrecy, privacy that the person gave that information to you.
Correct.
So how do you then navigate?
I'm not going to take the risk because it's on record to tell you how it actually happens. But conceptually, it's really recorded, right?
You could always,
Okay.
you could always switch off the recording.
That's fine. That's fine. The validation of insider information, it is something that we can still get. For example, Bali Hotel Association has got numbers that are given to industry insiders. It's just something you can't Google. But if you know the people in the BHA, you can get this information. They are not under any confidentiality clauses. So it's just the access. There is difficulty in accessing certain items. One other way we can get insider information, for example, one of the issues that I have now is I'm trying to do an eco-friendly hotel. So I want to have low emissivity glass that reduces the heating signature. And they ask me how much is it going to cost. Insider information can also be from me going to Alibaba, looking at what's the rough price per square meter of low E glass. At the same time, sending out 12 quotation requests to factories around China. I take the 12 quotations, I eliminate the top 2 and the bottom 2. I do the average of the middle 8. That's something that I think is validated. It's just whether you have people who can help you, who can come up with these suggestions, people who know that, sometimes you don't even know what you don't know. I never knew that there was this insider report for the Hotel Association in Bali. I was going to the tourism website until one of the hotel owners gave me this, because it's something that's just distributed amongst hotel owners in Bali. One other way that we have done it before, for example, you need information from a land office. What he can do is he can give you a WhatsApp video call and inadvertently show you what's on his screen. That's some way that you can do it. It's difficult. I won't say who's done it before, but I've heard about it. Yeah.
But there's another perspective to your question, which is as an entrepreneur, how confident are you in sharing that insider information with your investor without worrying about him going out, right? So are there some clauses in the term sheet that I think you spoke of in the previous class, like reps and warranties?
You have, as an entrepreneur, you have to be very careful, because there are a lot of people in the market who shop around for information. And most of the time we realize that it's not rocket science for most of the business ideas that we have. What we normally include in a term sheet if I'm an entrepreneur, it's a non-circumvention clause. The main reason for this is because if I were to give you all the information, you do have a confidentiality clause. That's one. But there's nothing to stop you from going to my supplier, to my advisors, to my programmers, to do the same thing 1 year later. It's easy, so it's basically stealing of an idea. A non-circumvention clause is very helpful because it blocks the investor from approaching suppliers, approaching your employees, approaching your key personnel. That's something that most investors would be thinking of, or you can assume most of them will be thinking, because to them the question is, why should I come to you? If you're that good, okay, fine. But most of the time you're not that good. You're supported by a large network of people who have the actual technical expertise. Right? For me, I'm useless. I can't even change a light bulb. So if someone were to go to my contractor, to go to my project manager, he could do the whole hotel without me. Right? There's not much value I can bring in other than structuring it. But to structure it is something that most investors would have the mental capacity to do. So that's one. And then, as Wykit was mentioning, representations and warranties. One way that investors and entrepreneurs handle the accuracy of information. I could be telling you that, I have a license agreement for building a car that runs on water. How accurate is that? Everyone's going to be quite scared. What I could do is to say that, if my representation to you that this car runs on water is that it actually runs on water. If it doesn't run on water, you've invested $100 million in my company, you can actually sue me to take back your $100 million. Most of the time, the company will be limited in terms of liability. So that's normally supported by a founder's personal guarantee or personal indemnity that you have. It could be $1 for $1, or it could be capped at, say, maximum of $20 million. So that's one of the ways investors would try to curb their risk. But most of the time, there's a big difference. I could be giving you a representation that says, my car runs on water. It runs on 1 liter of water gets you 50 kilometers. That's quite crazy, but could be possible. That's something I could give you. And you're going to be saying, are you sure or not? It's too wonderful. And then I say, yeah, it's really true. Then you're going to say, what happens if it hits 1 liter and you get 40 kilometers instead? So there are nuances in terms of the representations and warranties. It is a sliding bar. To what extent you go for materiality, to what extent you go for accuracy. One way that gets us over the hurdle in terms of negotiations on representations and warranties is that there is this thing called warranty and indemnity insurance. There are insurance companies that would insure representations and warranties. They bring in their own lawyers to review all the facts and then see that, okay, that's fine. It is something that we can do. So as an investor, your risk is curtailed, because if the founder blew his horn and wasn't really truthful, the investor can go after the insurance company, $1 for $1 match. So that works, and it's quite useful because most of the time this insurance premium, the value is about 1 to 3% of the deal size. For a $100 million deal, I don't mind paying $3 million to make sure that my downside is protected.
Can you buy options on that?
Sorry?
Can you buy options on that?
You can actually. There are private funds that will be happy to write an option. There are crazy high net worth individuals who actually would do that. They're going to say, Darren, you're investing in this company, $5 million. What's your valuation? I tell him the valuation. Then he can say, okay, let's just play. Basically, it's just a gamble. I think your valuation is going to be X dollars in 2 years. Do you want to take me up on that? Basically, I bet you. All right, I bet you Man U is going to win this weekend. It's going to lose this weekend. It's the same thing. You can do that. People do make money out of this. You have also private clubs that can do this type of thing. But I think that's more of another tangent.
Usually encounters going to the negotiation. Also, something like to put in mind for an entrepreneur. What are your top 3 things that you should keep in mind for the
as an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
The first thing you have to be very careful of is personal liability. You have started a company. Your company could be worth $100,000. Most of the time, if I'm an investor, I'm going to ask you to put your personal assets on the line. Is that something you dare to do or not? Because if I'm loaning you or investing $5 million in you, a wrong representation, a wrong warranty, maybe through no fault of yours, could still entitle me to go after your personal assets up to $5 million. That's one, personality. The second thing an entrepreneur must watch out for is the dilution that you have to face sooner or later down the road. So I saw you spoke about anti-dilution. You have to think about it from a quantum size. Are you going to continue being a majority, or would you drop into the minority? For example, Ninja Van, they were our juniors from RI. Yeah, the founders dropped down to 3%. So you just have to be careful with that. But they're worth 120 million now.
Even if you think about Snapchat, right? Like it's like 20B valuation, but you know he's going to be worth like 6B. He's not owning more than 50% of the company, right? So sometimes it's fine, right?
Yeah. How you structure your anti-dilution provisions would be the very first step down the road, because if you're looking at seed funding, Series A, B, C, pre-IPO and then IPO, whether you give up a lot now or a bit now and more later, it's going to play into whether you make $50 million in 2021 or whether you make $10 million in 2021. So that's something that you must be very, very well versed in. Play the scenarios in your mind. Anti-dilution, shareholder reserve matters, because you could move from a majority owner into a minority owner very, very quickly, which is the same thing Ninja Van faced. I was involved. I looked at some of their Series C items. You can see it's difficult once it gets to that, because you have the big guns coming in and no one's going to be backing down very easily. So I felt, they probably could have gotten a much better deal, the founders. That's the second one. The third pitfall that you have to be very careful of, I think it's just either over-exuberance, too much belief in yourself, that you're willing to tell the investor, yes, I can undertake this, I can undertake that. Because most of the time, investors are going to come to you, you're a startup, you have almost no value. And I'm going to ask, as an investor to you, you're the entrepreneur, what makes you so sure you can hit this? What makes you so sure you can hit that? I could be asking you very, very subtly, and then you're going to tell me, yeah, I should be able to hit 1 million by the end of year 1, 3 million by the end of year 3, 10 million by the end of year 4. And then I say, are you willing to put that in writing? And you're going to say, yeah, I'm really, really able to do that. Then I'm saying, yeah, okay, in that case, I'm just going to ask you for a dollar for dollar match if you don't hit that. And then that's just something you have to be very careful of. So to be very honest, it's, as an entrepreneur, better to under-promise and over-deliver than the other way around.
Though the paradox here is that sometimes you need to over-promise to get that funding to get you started, right?
Yes.
But my personal belief is that you should never put your personal assets on the line, right? Like it's always a
How common
tool.
is that though, that you have to put your personal assets on the line?
It's somewhat common that it's a starting point, but I would say it's also quite commonly received as feedback that you can negotiate that away. There's two schools of thoughts. One is like skin in the game, but you putting skin in the game is you putting your sweat equity and some form of financing in there as well, right? But you don't need to mortgage the house that your wife and kids are sleeping in, right? That's putting your personal assets on the line. And I think it's at least in this time and age, it's quite reasonable to delink those two, right?
You do have a lot of problems, especially for first-time entrepreneurs, because most of the time this is their first, their second, their third deal. Either they are really, really desperate for funds, or they are so confident in their product that they are willing to give in quite a lot. Most of the times, yeah, it's more of negotiation, but most of the time you just have to be very careful, because investors have gone through a lot. Like, for me personally, I've gone through over 150 deals. So after a while, you do see a pattern to things that are going on, and you are able to read the other side of the table. The other side of the table, you can assume is doing the same to you. We're not saying we go in there doubting or suspecting everything about what the other party is saying. But we just have to be very mindful that every single second we spend with the counterparty, he is sizing you up, whether consciously or subconsciously. One of the good things that I think comes out of good interpersonal interaction is that you build a lot of trust. So after this, if I ask you for beer, ask you for a meal, discuss, talk about your company, etc., I find that you're a great guy, it's gonna play into our negotiations. I could go a bit easier, vice versa. If I feel that there are a lot of weird things about you, that you're not saying things that add up, then in the negotiation table, I'm just going to be more careful on that. So a lot of this is not quantitative. It's not really a science. It's more of an art that you have to take note of. The biggest, or what I like, there was one deal that we had, was a much older gentleman, was the investor, and the entrepreneur was a very young guy, fresh out of school. It started as a very distant relationship. By the end of that deal, the founder was basically like a godson to the investor. So he got an extremely, extremely friendly definitive agreement. But if you were to look at the term sheet, which thankfully was not legally binding, it was a total different animal. Because the first term sheet you would have seen, it's probably a term sheet you'll see between two of the largest firms in Singapore, two of the largest law firms. By the end of the negotiations, it was a very friendly deal. Founder didn't have to put in cash. Founder didn't have to put in a personal guarantee. Founder got personal time, mentorship from the investor. The investor is worth a few $100 million in Singapore. So he's willing to put all his resources to help his newfound godson because that guy was very earnest, he was very confident in what he had to do. He was very candid to tell the investor, I do not have the experience. I do have a very good idea, but I need your help. I need your money. There's nothing else I can offer other than my ideas and my time. So basically the uncle was very, very taken by that because it's not easy to find a founder who can be so candid in such a straightforward and confident manner. So that plays, I think, to me, that's more than half of the battle in terms of the interpersonal.
As an entrepreneur, when do I know when to move from, let's say, a convertible note to a term sheet? So I'm raising money, right? So
yep.
I would presume that, let's say, you're not raising that large a sum anyway, right? And you're getting to do away with the legality, then you can go for something like SAFE or something like something more Y Combinator, for example. Then, so in general, I mean, are there any guidelines as to when would I say like a term sheet would be more appropriate as compared to, let's say, convertible note or,
Okay. So I guess the question is how do we transit from a convertible note, like maybe a 50K type of financing to something more substantial at pre-seed round, like 250, half. I think
is that really dependent on how much you're raising?
I think two things. One is the quantum, right? Because it's not really worth the time of a VC to go to them for like 20, 50K type of thing. I imagine even the lowest denominator I've seen is 300K. It's the lowest denominator I've seen. So at least that quantum matters because like, the time, like the value of the time of the VC is at least worth that quantum amount. But I think more importantly is the like what you're trying to get out of it. Because financing is just one part of the story. It's like identifying which profile of VC is fit for you, like what do you want to get out of the mentorship and the journey, identifying that and pitching that as your story to say, hey, you matter to me and I want to bring you on the table because this is the reason why. Beyond financing, I think that helps also. Other thoughts?
I think even when you're talking about a convertible note, you have terms in that note. Technically, a term sheet, it's a summary of big picture items. You could actually even have a term sheet for a convertible note. If we were to boil it down to very layman term, I could take a piece of paper, I'm going to write what's my interest rate, what's my quantum, when's my repayment. Those three terms put to you would be a term sheet in itself. You have the vanilla ones that you look 6 pages, 35 pages, most of the stuff would be laid out there. You have people, for example, just think about the Kopitiam Tau case. This guy are flush with $20, $50 million. They could write things down on a piece of paper. $20 million deal has been done before on a piece of paper. They wrote a term sheet on the spot saying that I'm going to buy your coffee shop. 4 tranches of payments. Let's do the deal. And it was just done straight there on the spot. Midnight, we were in a Kopitiam in Ang Mo Kio, we got that done. So that in itself was the term sheet as well. So if you're looking at term sheets, do not be constrained or do not be restricted to what you find to be the usual form of a term sheet. The concept of the term sheet is more important. It starts the ball rolling. Because if you have people who are not legally trained, who are not accounting trained, their thoughts are very susceptible to going all over the place. Once you have a term sheet, everyone's going to look at that same piece of paper, look at what are the main terms that will be done, your price, your time, your main conditions precedent. Once you have all of that done, then it's good to get the deal going. There is a term that says, this term sheet shall not be legally binding except for clauses X, Y, and Z. That in itself would then be a non-legally binding term sheet. Otherwise, from a legal perspective, everything that you sign is deemed to be legally binding. It is going to be assumed to be legally binding. So just make sure contracts, the last maybe 15 pages, the last 5 pages, you call them boilerplates. Further assurance clauses, governing law clauses, jurisdiction clauses. These are all very, very important. For example, there are clauses called counterparts clause that says that this agreement can be signed by parties and transmitted via electronic means. That allows me to sign one piece in Singapore and one piece in Hong Kong. And as long as I send an email to both, that's considered a signed contract. But if I do not have that counterpart, I need both parties to sign on the same piece of paper. So we have had issues like this before. If you have an inexperienced lawyer, he doesn't have that done, you have to fly both parties down. Or both parties sign, they send to each other, but that's not deemed to be legally binding. So boilerplates are something that, but you don't have to worry. I mean, most of the time, you would ask the lawyer to explain it to you. He's going to go into a lot of jargon, give him 5 minutes, and then ask him again in simple English. Yes or no, can or cannot. Yeah, same thing for accountants.
Yeah, you don't have to worry. If you are starting a startup, just engage Darren.
Yeah.
Okay, last one question, or maybe 2 questions next. Yeah, it's always tough standing between them and the weekend.
It's Friday night, you know.
Friday night.
Yeah.
Okay, Oscar, yeah, Oscar.
Yes, go ahead.
All right.
Just wanted to know you can share with us some experience related to business failure.
Okay.
The idea could not convert into a success business. What did you learn from that?
Business success and failure, based on my very limited experience, I feel the most important thing you have is time, the time management. It is easy when you're starting out. You'll be very gung-ho. You'll be looking at a lot of things. You're going to take on everything onto your plate. Once you start growing, once you go past the first million, once you go past the $10 million mark, you have to be more judicious in your time, your management. You have to identify the right people to help you out so that they save your time. Because most of the time, if we were to take 5 hours to do, for example, say a term sheet, that's not going to be very good. It's good if I am an NUS final year student launching my first startup. I can work on that for 5 hours. But if I am running a $50 million company, I can't be taking that 5 hours to draft something that a second year lawyer would be able to do for $2,000. So the time management is going to be very important once you start growing. You have to look at what's very important for you as a founder. You will be going out making deals, you'll be going out looking for investments. You cannot be stuck doing mundane stuff. You cannot be stuck doing record keeping. That's something that you could do when you were less than $1 million. But beyond a certain size, there's a difference. Why people are CEOs for certain size of companies, why some people were fired after their companies grew too big, why some people can't work with small companies but can work with large companies. So that's the time management, that's one. The second thing is finding talent who can help you. So for myself, I've been very, very blessed to have good partners as well as good managers. So most of the time they run. I've never, I mean, yeah, I can't change a light bulb, but my project manager is very good with hotel management, very good with making sure the architects, the structural engineers are all in line. Petrol as well, I have very good traders, people who have contacts in the petrol industry who can help me do all that. So what do I do most of the time? At the end of the day, I would be able to go out to look for more funding, to learn other things, like cryptocurrency was something we just launched last year. We learned that, so I had the time for that. I have the time to burn on Friday night with my beloved Y-Kid here. But it's all good because all of this we are always able to learn. So, for example, me coming here, just as a real life example, I could find someone in this class who could take one of my business divisions down the road. That's something that I feel would be extremely valuable to me. Conversely, if I was stuck in the office, doing my January month-end accounting, it's not going to be very useful for my long-term business, which is why I employ an accountant to do that. There are no accountants here, right? Yeah. My accounting is stuck because I've never done cash flow at all. So my exams, I just settle balance sheet and profit and loss. I skip the question on cash flow. I just do enough to pass. So that's why I'm very, very weak in cash flow.
Okay, cool. Any other questions? No, please.
Thank you.
Thanks.